But with regard to the Quiet Americans, so what did you get the idea from the films of the films, and what brought you to Vietnam?
Okay, so I was visiting Vietnam, and I went to the Ho Chi Minh Museum in Hanoi, and there I bought a copy of a book. I thought it was Ho Chi Minh's prison poems, and I was going to read it because I was traveling from Hue to Da Nang by train. So in the train, I pulled out the book that I bought. It was in a green cover, and I opened it up, and I expected to read Ho Chi Minh's poetry, but in fact it was Graham Greene's The Quiet American, a copy of another book, completely different. One that I had read as a student, but now I read it again. And here I was in Vietnam. I'd been to Hue, I'd been to Hanoi, and I was on my way to Ho Chi Minh City. And I started to read again Graham Greene's story, and I realized what a beautiful story it was, and how in many ways the relationship between the European guy, Fowler, and the Vietnamese woman, Phung, I realized that in that relationship between those two and with the American Alden Pyle, I realized that Graham Greene had written an allegory which described the relationship between Vietnam, America, and Europe, and the history of Vietnam in this emotional story. So I thought, wow, I got to make this into a movie. So I came here to Ho Chi Minh City. I was staying in the Continental Hotel, and as it so happened, they put me in the room where Graham Greene used to stay.
Really? It's so like fate.
Yes, I got the book. Now they've put me in the room. So Graham Greene was here. So then I picked up the phone and I phoned my office back in Los Angeles. And I said, please find out who owns the rights to this book. And 2 days later, they phoned me back and they said that it's your good friend, two friends. One, Sidney Pollock, whose office was about 50 meters from my office. He was my neighbor.
Oh, very close, right?
And then the other producer who owned the rights was also an old friend, Stefan Ehrenberg. So immediately I rang them and I said, please, let me be your partner to make this movie. It took 7 more years before we got to make the movie. Well, Ho Chi Minh City, like all of Vietnam, is going through enormous change.
Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, giống như mọi nơi tại Việt Nam, đang trải qua giai đoạn thay đổi lớn. Với hầu hết các trường hợp, thay đổi luôn tích cực. Nhưng tất nhiên, quảng trường này là một di tích lịch sử. Trong tiến trình thay đổi, nhiều tòa nhà bị phá đi sẽ không có gì thay thế được. Ở một góc độ nào đó, điều này khiến nhiều người rất buồn, vì đây giống như trái tim của quận Nhất. Với nhiều tòa nhà đẹp quanh đây, sẽ thật đáng tiếc nếu không giữ được những kiến trúc xây dựng ban đầu. Quảng trường này đã thay đổi hoàn toàn.
I can feel how much love you have to this city, because of the Quiet American. Thank you. Could you tell us about your feelings, anytime you return to this city? And are they similar or different at every time?
Ever since I made The Quiet American in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, I can't say that it's the same ever since then, because that was such a life experience that changed me in so many ways, in the heart and the mind, because we had such wonderful cooperation from all the Saigonese, from the highest to the lowest, from artists to the ordinary people, from the government officials to the local shopkeepers in Saigon. And that was, I think, in my experience of filmmaking, quite unique, because we felt so welcome and everyone gave us such help. It was almost like the city and the people wanted the film to be a success. Not always like that when you're making movies. If you go to New York, sometimes it's in a city like that, it's very difficult. People don't want you. But the Vietnamese people were so welcoming when we were making that film. So every time after that, when I come back, I go back to the Continental Hotel. I go back to the cafe where character Phung took her tea. And I sit there and two things happen. One, I see change, of course. The square is changing. The city is changing. The nation is changing. The people are changing. But I also remember those days working there together with the Vietnamese. So coming back each time now, since that time, it's very moving in my heart. So it's very emotional to come back.
But I really curious about it. What's the most difficulties about shooting the quiet American in this city?
In this city, we didn't have any difficulties.
Really?
There were no difficulties. Nothing. We asked to close the square there in front of the Opera House. So the city officials said yes. At some times you can close it during the day. So we were able to close it. Then we said we'd like to set off some explosions in that square. Shopkeepers said yes. The city officials said yes. The army said yes. The police said yes. Everyone said yes, yes, yes. Nobody said no on that movie. That was the unusual thing. Only yes, we heard.
Wow, that sounds just so great to you, right? And amazing jobs in the city, and you hear yes everywhere.
Yeah, and well, I think it probably it's for a number of reasons. One is that even though that novel, The Quiet American, was written by Graham Greene, who's an Englishman, Mr. Greene captured something that was very true about the Vietnamese struggle for independence. And no other document, in a way, no other story quite captured the truth of that, and in the way that he captured it. So The Quiet American, the novel, is much loved by all Vietnamese. So I think from the highest to the lowest, Vietnamese people wanted to see a film of The Quiet American. That's one big difference. When I first came to Ho Chi Minh City, everywhere people were selling, young kids were selling the book. Now, of course, they're not selling the book, they're selling the DVD.
I really love to hear that from you. And I know that you spend time of sharing your experience making films with a student who have a great passion to make films in Vietnam. And I would love to hear what you advise them.
Well, I advise them that today, young Vietnamese has an enormous opportunity. The country has 90 million people. The cinema industry is poised to be really vital. Cinemas are opening up all over the country. The multiplexes are allowing Vietnamese to go and see the latest Hollywood movies, but they're also allowing Vietnamese filmmakers to distribute their films in cinemas and get their money back. So I think that in 10 years' time, you're going to see a cinema industry that's as strong as Hong Kong or Korea or Japan. So the future is yours. You can do anything.
Now talk a little bit about your families. Since their last visit, they had left many good impressions with Vietnamese art. Do you have time to discover the city with your family?
My youngest is just 16 weeks. So she's too young, doesn't understand a lot. But my 3-year-old has started to walk around the streets with my wife and look and explore and get to know Ho Chi Minh City. Just District 1, he had a lot of fun. He's only 3, but like so many children, he became fascinated with the riverboats of Saigon River, the barges that are going up and down carrying produce. And by the end of the morning, he was counting all the boats, and he could tell me about where they were going, what they were carrying. So for my son, the Saigon River has become his Saigon.
Wow, that sounds so good. And how much do they like about the cities? Can you share, their experience here?
Well, my wife is a shoe designer. She's come to Vietnam. She came last year for the first time. She's become determined not just to make shoes in Vietnam, but also to make clothes, which, of course, has been the dream of many people who have come here because you have such good tailors and beautiful material. So she's investigating now setting up a business where she's going to make her clothes here in Vietnam and export them to America and Australia. But she just loves exploring all of the tailor shops and the fabric shops and also the great designers that you have here in Vietnam.
And what is your favorite things about the living here?
About
Living here.
About living here?
Yes.
Is the attitude of Vietnamese people, because Vietnamese people are very surprising, very strong, and yet extremely charming. And Vietnamese people carry themselves. People talk about mannequins on a catwalk, how they walk. Well, for me, just looking at Vietnamese people is a pleasure because they carry themselves not like a mannequin, like a Vietnamese, which is a particular way of walking, not like we walk in the West, but Vietnamese carry themselves with like they're gliding along and with dignity. It's glide like birds, whereas we Westerners, we walk like elephants.
And what special things does this city offer to you to have you come back here more often?
Oh, well, change. Change is a marvelous thing. As you get older, you appreciate change even more. And when I first came here, when I first came to Hanoi, in Hanoi there were no neon lights, only kerosene lamps and oil lamps. That city has gone ahead almost, as much as Ho Chi Minh City. But so there's been enormous change in Vietnam. And every time I come back, I can see change. If I'm away for a week, a month, a year, 5 years, you can see it, you can feel it, it's everywhere. Now that's an exciting thing because the country is remaking itself and it's forging its identity. So to see that, that's very, very exciting. Also to see the young people here, they look at the world from a unique position, given the history of this country. So just being able to observe that. Now, for you, that's not special because you're living here all the time. But for someone from the outside who goes to many different countries, this country is very special.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to this talk show today.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for having me back in Vietnam. See you next time.
Quý vị và các bạn thân mến, Tuyết Minh hy vọng rằng chuyên mục Sài Gòn và tôi kỳ này đã mang đến cho quý vị những giây phút thú vị cùng đạo diễn Phillip Noyce. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại.
Chuyên đề Sài Gòn tôi yêu phát sóng vào Chủ nhật hàng tuần trên kênh VTV4.